Have you ever thought that the world is going mad? That it's lurching from crisis to crisis? That common sense and rationality seem to have vanished? Is the world out of control? Or is it perhaps under the control of people we cannot control? What's really going on? For those who want to look behind the headlines and hear the questions asked which no one dares ask, this is the Laughland Report.
Hello everybody, welcome to the Laughland Report. I'm delighted to have Frederik Jansen here in the Amsterdam studio. Frederik Jansen is a Member of Parliament for FVD, member of the board of the party, one of the founder members, one of the main people in the party. Freddie, you gave a speech recently about LGBT propaganda in schools.
Yeah.
Tell us about that. It's a bill, I assume, in the Dutch Parliament, or perhaps you already have such propaganda. Why did you speak about this recently? Tell us about the issues.
Yes, well, first of all, thank you for having me. But there's no specific new bill.
Okay.
It's things that are already going on in specifically the Ministry of Education,
right.
Culture and Science.
Right.
And they are doing all sorts of campaigns for LGBT things, especially in schools.
Yeah.
And it's something few people talk about,
yeah.
but it's something that more and more people are running into, more and more parents are running into.
Yeah.
A lot of young children are confronted with all these ideas,
right.
and they are getting confused in my eyes.
And what exactly are we talking about? Are we talking about just sex education, and maybe you have whatever feeling, you're an adolescent, you have feelings for whatever the same sex or something, or is it a bit more hardcore than that?
It's more than that. It's ideological. Yeah. So they teach children that there is no such thing as biological sex.
Exactly. Yeah.
That there is something.
It's gender theory.
Yeah, gender theory, gender identity.
Yeah.
That they develop that somewhere along the line, and I think this is very harmful for children.
Is this now, when you say it's gender theory, is it now, as it were, official that is now taught in Dutch schools?
Well, it's not part of the official curriculum, but there are a lot of foundations that are giving all these talks at schools.
Yes, because they bring people in from outside,
Yeah, and that is funded by the government.
Yeah, exactly.
So it is still indirect.
Yeah.
It is more and more mandated as well by the government. So in secondary school, it's mandatory for schools to give attention to LGBT stuff.
Yeah.
But in primary school, it's not yet the case, I believe, but it is already being propagated on a mass scale.
Now, that's gender theory. What about the T part of LGBT?
The transgenders.
Yeah, the transgender, the trans agenda, the transgender agenda.
Yeah,
Is that being pushed as well in schools?
Yes, very much so. So the Rutgers Foundation, which was originally founded to fight against overpopulation, so you can see where this is all coming from. Yeah. They are specifically doing all these LGBT things, and they have done the Week van de Lentekriebels, translates roughly to the week of the spring vibes or something.
Right.
And they did all sorts of promotional stuff where they had this material for teachers, in which teachers would ask the children, did you get boys or girls toys, and why?
Yeah.
Why did you? Do you feel attracted to boys or girls, and why? On a scale from 1 to 10, do you feel like a boy or a girl?
Sure.
So it's very specifically aimed to confuse children about their gender, so-called gender identity.
Yeah. And in other words, with a view to perhaps opening the path of some kind of transition.
Yeah, and in what they say, of course, is that they just want children to be themselves, and they want to take away barriers for people to be themselves, and a culture wherein this is not acceptable. Yeah. But in my eyes, it's just putting these ideas in the heads of children, which they would never by themselves get.
Yeah. I don't want to bring everything back to international relations, but there is an international relations dimension to this, because certain countries, in particular Russia, are very strongly opposed to this kind of stuff in schools.
Yeah.
And Putin, in fact, recently referred to transsexualism or trans, medical procedures being proposed to children as, he referred to it as pure Satanism. in a speech, in a very important speech. And this is a big division on the international scene between generally Eastern European countries, Hungary, Poland, and so on, but also Russia are against it. But Western countries are
very much for it.
much more in favour of it.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't want, as I say, to reduce everything to international affairs, but it's remarkable to me how. So, for instance, on the 25th of February, the head of MI6, the British Secret Intelligence Service, tweeted a tweet about deploring the war in Ukraine and said that let's remember what divides us from Putin. It's LGBT rights.
Right. Yeah.
So, in other words, there you are faced with a big geopolitical clash. You're faced with tanks rolling over fields and people dying and so on. And the main thing that the man who is responsible for British security tweets about is LGBT rights.
Yeah.
And that to me suggests that
very telling.
This thing is a symbol of something much bigger. What do you think it's a symbol of?
Well, I agree.
Apart from
very
the actual
much.
thing of people's sexual orientation, it's a kind of totem, really.
Yeah, it is a totem, and it's also political ideologies are always packages.
Yeah.
So you believe in climate change, and you also believe in gender. So it's always packaged together.
Yeah.
But I think. In addition to what you said, it's a very American phenomenon.
Yeah.
So it's an American cultural thing that is pushed in Europe.
Yeah.
And this is why even in the Netherlands, where we speak a different language than English, all these words are English.
Yeah,
so
indeed.
we are not saying geslachtsidentiteit, we're saying gender identity.
Yes.
There's not even a translation.
Yeah,
it's an immediate integration of English language into the Dutch vocabulary about this.
Yeah.
So it's just cultural domination from America, and I think it's very important, as you say, it's something more than just about LGBT and whatever. It stands for, and that's why I think the Frankfurt School is relevant. It stands for a concept of democracy that is not about voting. It is the antithesis to fascism.
Yes.
And that is what the Frankfurt School defined democracy as after the war, of course.
Yes.
But we're now already delving
let's
into
go
it.
on to that, because that's exactly where I was hoping we would the conversation would lead, because you said this has come from America. That's true. Judith Butler is the main ideologue, an American academic of gender theory.
Yeah.
But if I follow your suggestion, you are saying that actually the ideas go back to this school of Marxists in essentially mostly German and French Marxists.
And later America, of course.
And later America. Yeah. So tell us about that story. Because I know you're writing, or perhaps you're not writing, but you are hoping to write a doctoral thesis on it.
Well, that would be perfect. But first I would want to write my ideas down to start with.
Yeah.
But I think, so we have to go back a little bit in history to understand where this all comes from. So we have to go back to Marx, of course.
Yeah.
Marx foresaw a revolution, a socialist revolution, and it never came.
Yeah.
And especially with the failed German Revolution, out of which the Weimar Republic was established, and the foundation of or actually the Russian Revolution and the foundation of the Soviet Union, that led to a crisis in Marxism in the 20s of the 20th century.
Yeah.
And they started thinking, like, why did actual Marxism not develop in the West?
Yes.
Why did it shift to the East?
Yes.
For one, why did it fail in Germany?
Yes.
And all these questions were the basis for their sort of reinvention of Marxism. They went back to Marx,
absolutely,
because Marx had been. It's been 70 years between these revolutions and his writings, 60, 70 years. So they went back to his works to sort of reestablish the whole dialectical thinking, because they thought that specific thing was lost in vulgar economic Marxism.
Yeah.
And that is also the type of Marxism that was implemented in the Soviet Union.
Absolutely, exactly. They went back to a more, shall we say, cultural or social Marxism.
Yeah.
And the dialectic, you're absolutely right, that is the absolute key, because nothing is what it is, everything is something else, everything flows into something else, contradiction and so on, opposites unite and disunite and all the rest of it.
Yeah, so maybe for the viewers it's not clear what dialectics is, but Marx's dialectical thinking goes back to Hegel, of course, and so it's the idea that the totality contains in itself its own contradiction.
That's right.
And out of this constant internal contradiction comes a new state of being.
Yeah.
We know the classical thesis, antithesis, synthesis.
Yeah.
And Marx took this and applied it to material reality.
Yeah.
And he said this is not just ideas that develop this way, but material reality also develops this way.
Exactly.
And that is his view of history.
That's right.
So there's a totality, for example, feudalism. And within feudalism, you have different classes, and they are in constant contradiction with each other. And out of this contradiction develops a new system, new form. And that was capitalism, specifically. And he believed that in capitalism are also contradictions, and they will ultimately lead to a new synthesis, namely socialism.
And Engels, of course, went even further in the Dialectic of Nature and in other writings, and of course in the Communist Manifesto, which he co-wrote with Marx, where he says, he denounces the metaphysician for saying yes, yes, no, no. So the metaphysician, so he's sort of more or less referring to Aristotle, said yes to certain things, no to others. In other words, gave clear answers and said, this is something, and there is the rule of non-contradiction, which is the basic of Aristotelian logic. And Engels, very much in the following Heraclitus, said, no, this is rubbish. Everything is change. Everything is in constant flux. Yeah. And I'm sure you agree with me that is the T of LGBT. It's this notion that everything is in flux, that you're always transitioning. Thierry Baudet, his famous Boréal speech, he talked about the new idol of transition. Yeah. And that seems to me to come, as you have said, from people going back to Marx and bypassing all the economic stuff, which was discredited, and actually going back to the philosophical core of Marxism, which is this notion of flux and change.
That is a very interesting way to look at it. It's not specifically what I thought, but it is true, I think. There is within Marxism a debate about transgenderism, because when I research this stuff, I'm delving into sort of Marxist rabbit holes on YouTube where usually people like us don't go. Yeah. It's very funny and interesting because they have arguments amongst themselves about specifically also transgenderism, because it's to some what they say is that to some it seems like a classical idealist take on the world. Yeah. Like I determine my own identity. Yeah. It's ideas, it's Hegel. Yeah. But they say no, there's a material basis because of biological sex and that sort of thing. So they have their own discussions about this. So it's not very clear. I would not say that it is a perfect translation of their transition theory into the trans stuff. But it's a very interesting...
But there is, in Marx and in Engels, a clear attack on the family.
Yeah, definitely.
That's one of the pillars that, to get together with the nation, obviously, that Marxism seeks to overthrow, both in the Communist Manifesto and in, I believe it's one of the earliest works, isn't it? Family, Property and the State. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because they see that the family, in their view, the family is the place where capitalism reproduces itself. Yeah. And that is what the Frankfurt School was also going to believe after Marx, that the family is a place where systems of repression reproduce.
That's where the authoritarian personality comes from, the father figure in the family and so on.
Exactly. So that's a very classical Marxist point that they further develop in their own thinking. But to get back to the revolutions, the failed revolution, Marxist revolutions of the 20s, they sought to, first of all, find an explanation for why that was, and a solution. This is where the Frankfurt School starts, as a matter of fact, because in their view, science is not just descriptive, but specifically the researcher should be part of social change with his research. Absolutely. And this is critical theory. Absolutely. And this is the type of research that is now dominant in universities. Yeah. This is their idea. And
but in the natural sciences, you mean, or in the
social
humanities?
sciences?
Social sciences, yes, exactly.
Yeah. So their research is not just explaining and understanding the world, but it's also trying to change it.
That's Marx.
And it is Marx. Yeah, this is also from Marx. They get this idea, but it's a very radical diversion from Popperian science. Yeah,
And is there a link, do you think, between the rejection of the authoritarian personality, which, as we know, Adorno and the others said came from the family and from the father? Is there a link between that and what I think one has to call a sort of hatred of virility in politics? Because it often strikes me that in the again, as I say, I shouldn't bring everything back to international relations, but in the conflict with Russia, there is a very clear sexual dimension in the sense that Europe, embodied by Ursula von der Leyen, has a sort of, if you like, feminine or perhaps effeminate identity.
Yeah, definitely.
And one of the things that these people hate about Russia is that it is governed by, a real man, who takes his shirt off and can sometimes appear to be a bit of a caricature. So I often feel that there is a sexual dimension, and the idea of removing the patriarchal element by through surgery, which is what transsexualism is about.
Yeah, you're very right.
Yeah.
And I'm just looking for the page where this is in the authoritarian personality, because we're skipping history a little bit.
Yeah.
But it is very interesting because you're totally right. So on page 428, this is discussed. For the viewers, this is the main
Bible. Yeah.
This is their Bible. Yeah. So this is the authoritarian personality.
Yeah.
Written by Theodor Adorno, one of the thinkers of the Frankfurt School, and a few others, who've never become as famous as him. And they did a study. So after they moved from Germany to America, they did a study. They had to get money from somewhere.
Yeah.
So they were funded to do this study about anti-Semitism. Yeah. And from this developed a study into fascism in general, which they ultimately just sort of say are synonyms.
Yes.
In it, they try to understand not just what is a fascist, but who is a potential fascist. That is their main question. Yes. And they have all sorts of things. So they have the F scale, which is very famous in social science. The F scale is the fascism scale. Yeah. A number of items on which people score them. And they have a ranking from 0 to 5.5 on whether they are not a fascist. Yeah. And but the most interesting part of their research was actually the interviews. Yeah. Because they also conducted a lot of interviews, and so they compared people scoring high on the F scale to people scoring low on the F scale, and tried to find significant differences in their upbringing, social status, social all sorts of things and one of the things is how people looked at masculinity and femininity. So it's very true, and so this part is about that specifically, but it's throughout the whole thing. Yeah. And I've made some notes for myself because I don't want to ruin this work, because it's quite hard to get because it's not printed that often. Yeah. And so they say that the high F person, so the potential fascist, describes himself, in case of men, in manly terms, like persistence and that sort of thing, energy and industry, independence, willpower, that sort of terminology. And they this is not this part, but it's throughout the book. Yeah. But they say it's a sort of pseudo masculinity. Yeah. And they say that it's so real masculinity in their view is like being able to be soft. We know all these things from the whole LGBT discussion. And femininity, high scoring females, they would describe themselves as more caring and soft and also classical female values. So you're very right, and they have a suspicion of people describing themselves, of men describing themselves in masculine terms, and of course women in feminine terms, because in their eyes it's a sign that someone is at least potentially a fascist.
That's right. So in what sense does the LGBT agenda and ideology come from the Frankfurt School?
Yeah, so to understand why sexual liberation in their eyes was important, you have to go back to the war, because they viewed that fascism had come from a specific basis in European culture, which they saw was the essence actually of European culture. European culture always would have led to the Second World War. And they sought to understand these processes in their eyes and also to fix them.
Yeah.
And specifically, Marcuse wrote a number of books that are very interesting. Everyone was obsessed by this topic. But Marcuse said that to fix it at least, so the proletariat had betrayed the revolution, that in their eyes the proletariat could never be trusted again because they had supported fascism. So they had to look for smaller minority groups that were in themselves revolutionary.
Yes.
So by their being were revolutionary.
Yes,
and that is what Marcuse describes.
Yes.
They are the outside groups. It's
that's very interesting.
Yeah, so specifically by activating those groups, because in their being they are the antithesis of the system, they are outsiders who can attack the system and undermine it. So it's all about consciousness. This is where it all started.
And what are these
Hegel.
groups? Which are these groups?
Well, I can read the part in the book. It should be about here. So here he says, but the struggle for the solution has outgrown the traditional forms. The totalitarian tendencies of the one-dimensional society render the traditional ways and means of protest ineffective, perhaps even dangerous, because they preserve the illusion of popular sovereignty. This illusion contains some truth. The people, previously the ferment of social change, have moved up to become the ferment of social cohesion. Here, rather than in redistribution of wealth and equalization of classes, is the new stratification characteristic of advanced industrial society. However, underneath the conservative popular base is the substratum of outcasts and outsiders, the exploited and persecuted of other races and colors, the unemployed and unemployable. They exist outside the democratic process. Their life is the most immediate and most real need for ending intolerable conditions and institutions. Thus their opposition is revolutionary, even if their consciousness is not. And that is the point, because they all of their work, especially in the 30s, had been about consciousness and how can we create class consciousness among the proletariat. And that had failed. So he describes we have to activate these other groups. And through critical theory, through showing the contradictions, through showing their repressed status. And in doing that, activating them against the system to destroy the system. And he writes in another book a specific passage, which is very interesting, and this goes back to LGBT.
Well, this is the whole abandonment by the left, isn't it? As you've said, of the working class. The working class is no longer interests the left. It's only these minorities which are, as you've just very well said, by their very being anti-system, or at least are instrumentalized for that purpose. Exactly.
That is what happened in the 20th century, in the second half. And here, so we're skipping all of Freud because they were obviously obsessed by Freud. But it's about sexual perversion. So this is, of course, 50s language. We would say it differently today. So they say that society, of course, functions, and capitalist society procreates itself or reproduces itself in the family, in the heterosexual monogamic family. So he says, to find the part, so the perversions seem to give a promesse de bonheur greater than that of the normal sexuality. What is the source of their promise? Freud emphasized the exclusive character of deviations from normality, their rejection of procreative sex, their rejection of the procreative sex act. The perversions thus express rebellion against the subjugation of sexuality under the order of procreation and against the institutions which guarantee this order. Psychoanalytic theory sees in the practices that exclude or prevent procreation an opposition against the continuing chain of reproduction and thereby of paternal domination, an attempt to prevent the reappearance of the father.
That really is very clear, isn't it? That's from Marcuse's Eros and Civilization. That's very clear indeed.
This is specifically why sexually deviant groups are important in these in the attack on the system, and in combination with all the other things that he wrote, I think this is actually what is behind the whole idea of the LGBT movement.
Absolutely. Well, that's absolutely fascinating. Thank you very much. I didn't know that passage, but that really is. There's
much more.
I shall take down the reference and quote it myself. Thank you so much, Freddie. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much for watching. See you soon. Goodbye.